In functional medicine, there's a lot more detailed testing that we can do than conventional doctors do on a regular basis. And it's important to understand the difference between disease, late signs and symptoms of those diseases, and then the inflammatory hidden beneath the surface to conventional docs of inflammation, hormone imbalance, gut health, toxic overload, nutrition, and all those things. So in my previous video where I talked about the differences between functional medicine and conventional medicine, I talked about the visible portion of the iceberg above the top of the waterline is the heart attack, strokes, cancer, dementia, COPD, and then signs and symptoms like weight gain, brain fog, cholesterol, erectile dysfunction, and blood pressure. Those are all the things that the conventional medicine doctor sees and has drugs for, but is not looking at the underlying causes. So what I'm going to do in this video is to go through each of the tests that a conventional doctor would do and what a functional medicine doctor would do in addition to evaluate the problem further. In order to fully understand this, you will have wanted to watch my previous video. And so let's start with the disease first. So the diseases, this means that the problem has already been ongoing for years to possibly decades, and now it has shown itself as a heart attack, a stroke, cancer, dementia, COPD, and there's tests that a conventional doctor would do. Some of those tests would be maybe a stress test, an echocardiogram, which is an ultrasound looking at the structure of the heart, and an EKG. What a functional medicine doctor would do would maybe take it a step further and do what's called a CMET, or cardiometabolic exercise test. And this takes into consideration the PFT, which is how well the patient breathes while in their stress test. So a typical stress test is just an EKG on a treadmill. The CMET takes it a step further where they put a breathing mask on and all of the oxygen that they're taking out of the air can be measured, and we call that VO2 max. So it's a more detailed stress test. But once again, finding late signs of disease as far as heart attacks. Another thing you can do in the stroke world, there's not a whole lot you can do in the stroke world, generally considering that if we're measuring the heart, then we're probably measuring what's going on with the brain as well, because there's no stress test for the brain. I mean, if you have brain fog every day, that's a pretty good stress test for your brain, but it's not saying that you're set up for strokes. But if your heart or blood vessels are showing signs of disease, then your likelihood of stroke is higher. You can do a carotid ultrasound or a carotid blood vessel age test, and that can give you an idea if there's inflammation above your neck into your brain, but even that's not a great test for are you at risk for stroke. The general rule of thumb is if there's any atherosclerosis or thickening of your blood vessels anywhere in your body, then you are at higher risk for all of the blood vessel diseases, and those are heart attacks, strokes, peripheral vascular disease into the legs, and kidney disease. All of those are the same disease process in different places of the body. The reason why the heart and the brain are the big ones is because there's no dual blood flow, there's no recirculation or collateral circulation, as we say. So if a portion of that heart loses blood flow, it is dead and it's never going to come back. Same thing with the brain. If you have a stroke and that portion of the brain dies, it's dead and you're not getting that back, which is why those organs are considered to be a bigger deal when that happens. So another thing you can do to analyze COPD is that comes out in your pulmonary function test or your PFT, which is part of your stress test or CMET if you're doing the more detailed analysis. Some of the later signs, earlier than those, of course, late signs and symptoms that you can see is brain fog. We can measure that in the functional medicine world doing a CNS vital signs test. And that's something where you get online and you take a series of computer tests. And what it does, it analyzes various sections of your brain or portions of your brain, from language to memory to visual spatial orientation. And that gives you a score. And based on that score, you can determine if you have early signs of dementia, early signs of brain fog, or brain dysfunction. Now, obviously, the later stages of dementia, there's MoCA testing and other things you can do for dementia, which is up here, but I like to use the CNS vital signs as an early measurement of that dysfunction because it's easier to reverse the earlier you catch it. And of course, weight gain, we do a body composition in our office for your body fat percentage, your muscle mass percentage, or muscle mass weight, and that's how we can determine if there are early signs of weight gain. Although that's a pretty physical sign, we can usually determine, the patient usually tells us that they're gaining weight. I forgot to put a T in that, weight gain. And then of course, high cholesterol, which is one of the things conventional medicine is obsessed with, checking cholesterol levels. As you may know if you've watched any of my other videos, that cholesterol is not the main reason for having heart attacks, strokes, whatever it may be. It is one of the contributors, but ultimately for me, it's just a sign that your biochemistry is wrong. If you have high cholesterol, it says something else is going on. The liver's making too many cholesterol particles, and if we improve the nutrition, if we decrease the inflammation, then cholesterol improves. The main reason why it's on here is because the increased cholesterol and increased blood pressure lead to blood vessel damage. And that blood vessel damage, of course, is what ultimately causes the heart attacks and strokes. And as I mentioned over here, the ED or erectile dysfunction of men, this blood vessel disease is the ultimate problem. So we need to be analyzing this, and one of the early ways to detect that is with these tests, and then of course everything else below. But these 3 tests are typically not utilized by conventional doctors. The first one is a carotid age, or also called a CIMT. And what we're doing here is we're looking at the microscopic thickness of your carotid artery, and based on the thickness of that artery, it can give you a blood vessel age. Are you as thick is your carotid as thick as a 90-year-old, or is it like a 30-year-old? And based on that thickness, it can give you a blood vessel age, and that's one of the ways you can determine where am I at in my paradigm of developing heart attacks and strokes. Now, that doesn't tell you if you are going to have one tomorrow or the next day, but if your age is younger, that says that you're in a lower risk category. The next step is the max pulse test. This is a simple device that you put on your finger, and what it's doing is measuring the microscopic expansion of the capillaries in the arteries and capillaries of your finger. And based on that, it's telling you how pliable, how compliant those vessels are. Each time your heart beats, it's pushing blood into the microscopic circulation. That microscopic circulation, it's not like PVC pipes in your house that have a constant flow. That microscopic circulation has to open up and accept that heartbeat, and then it's also got to squeeze down on it to keep that blood flow moving. That's a big issue in the nitric oxide world. Without nitric oxide, you can't dilate and accept that heartbeat. If you can't dilate and accept that heartbeat and you remain squeezed down on it, well, that causes high blood pressure. And then all of this is, of course, related to erectile dysfunction. If you can't dilate those blood vessels, then you cannot get an erection. So high cholesterol, high blood pressure, you can pick up early signs of disease well before heart attacks and strokes pick up with simple devices, a harmless ultrasound of your neck and a simple device that you wear on your finger for a few minutes. One of the other things you can do, some conventional doctors do a calcium score. And the calcium score is not my favorite test because it does involve a CAT scan. And this CAT scan is radiation, of course. It's a good test because it lets you know if there's any signs of early plaque buildup around the heart, but at the same time it misses some people. So it's not my favorite thing to do because of the radiation, and it misses people. So if it were positive, in order to track it, you'd of course have to do more CAT scans, and that's more radiation. And radiation of course causes cancer, DNA breaks, oxidation, all of those bad things, so to speak. So it's not my favorite test, but we do use it. I much prefer the non-invasive, harmless, no radiation other test to assess blood vessel health. That is typically all of the testing that conventional doctors do in order to detect early signs of disease, or prevent, as they like to say. But notice below this pink line, there's a whole host of testing that we can do in order to determine if there's any other underlying signs of inflammation or imbalance that would ultimately cause these diseases or early signs and symptoms. So down here, you're mainly not going to have many symptoms, or some people do have symptoms already, but ideally you want to catch this before it's even causing symptoms. So there's a lot of things on here, and I certainly don't want to go over each one in detail, but I just want to give you a broad overview of all the things in functional medicine that we can do. So everything is always related to inflammation in our world. Almost everything causes some sort of inflammation, which ultimately causes a system disruption in what you know as a symptom, okay? So as far as inflammation, this is easy to test. We do this through blood, we do this through urine. We can test for autoimmunity. All of these things are inflammatory markers, but for me, inflammation is more of a later sign. I want to catch it even before it's at the inflammatory stage. But there are numerous markers of inflammation. I have other videos on inflammation and what those markers mean individually. So we'll suffice it to say that we can check blood and urine for inflammation. And then we'll start at the left side of the diagram and work our way here. So hormone imbalance is a common reason for people to feel the way they feel. And there's multiple hormones. There's adrenal, there's thyroid, there's sexual hormones, which is your testosterone, your estrogens for men and women. And then there's growth hormone, which is formerly known as your youth hormone. The older you get, unfortunately, that growth hormone starts declining. So you want to do anything anything you can to stimulate that growth hormone in order to stay young and healthy and vibrant. These are easy to test. This is mostly simple blood tests. The adrenal glands I do through the urine. It can be done through the saliva also. But an entire hormone evaluation is important to understand where your body is and that it may need some hormone replacement temporarily while you're working on these other things that may have caused the hormone imbalance. And of course, there's supplements we can do to try to rebalance hormones, but sometimes you just need the replacement. Energy dysfunction, that is wrapped into inflammation, although I don't have it really labeled very well in this diagram. But anything that causes inflammation, any kind of hormone imbalance, nutrition dysfunction, any kind of toxic overload causes energy dysfunction. And it's almost like when the energy gets affected, the immune system goes looking for whatever the problem is. And when the immune system goes looking for it, that's inflammation, and it actually causes further energy dysfunction. So a way to check for your energy dysfunction, we've got numerous tests, but the most comprehensive one for this specific marker is called the Nutri-Eval. That tests for vitamins, it tests your detox markers, and it's an overall vitamin assessment of how well you're utilizing your vitamins and what are the vitamins you need and how well those energy processes are working. Of course, most importantly is the gut health. So we do lots of gut testing in functional medicine. There's numerous tests we can do. Comprehensive stool studies is the most common thing we do, whether it's a GI effects, a CDSA, GI map. One easy way to determine what's going on with the gut is to collect some of the stuff coming out of the gut, which is also known as stool. And so if we check the stool, it can give us an idea of how that microbiome is. What's the inflammation like? Is there overgrowth? Is there poor digestion? Then, of course, there's the organic acids test, which can also be found in the Nutri-Eval, but there's a separate organic acids test, which helps you look for yeast overgrowth, mold, bacterial overgrowth, Clostridia, all kinds of gut markers. This can also help you understand your energy dysfunctions, as well as toxin markers. Next is the toxic overload, and this is a big component of inflammation because once again, as I mentioned earlier in the energy dysfunction, is if the body's overloaded with toxins, it activates the immune system and says something is invading us, go kill it. But it doesn't have anything to kill. Toxins are chemicals. They're not to be killed, but the body doesn't know that. And so it triggers this inflammatory response that just starts damaging other things and causing the heart attacks and strokes up above. So there's multiple versions of toxins, and I talked about it a bit in my previous video. Biological toxins. So I've got Marcons listed. That's a bacteria that grows in your sinuses and nose. You've got Mycoplasma, one that grows in your sinus or in your lung tracts. It's a respiratory bacteria. And then you've got Lyme, of course, which causes systemic disease and has multiple stages to hide in people's systems in order to keep making biological toxins and, of course, propagate itself. Then mold. Mold is a huge one. Water-damaged buildings, and no matter if it's your home or your office or whatever it may be. So we can test for those mold toxins. Then there's chemicals. This is the big hidden one because we've all been exposed to chemicals, whether it be Roundup or MTBE, styrene, plastics, pesticides, herbicides, bug sprays in your building, probably in this building. So all of those chemicals, some people accumulate, many people accumulate, and it's about how well you can detoxify those in addition to how well you can avoid as many of those as possible. So we can check for those chemicals. There's multiple toxin panels we can do. Then, of course, there's heavy metals, which are lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, and multiple other heavy metals. So if you're overloaded in any of these, of course, it's triggering inflammation and causing disease. So in the functional medicine world, we're testing each one of these in order to find the ultimate causes of your inflammation and fix them and reverse them. Last but not least is nutrition, and despite thinking that there is no test for nutrition, there are tests for nutrition. Of course, you can do DNA and genes on nutrition, but I think that's in the early stages right now. And so mainly we do it clinically based on, we give you a diet plan or a food plan, and based on how you're doing on the food plan is how we change it. And based on what problems you may have, we will choose a food plan specific to you and your individual biochemistry. But there's also celiac testing. You don't think about it. That's an autoimmune test, but really it's an autoimmune test towards gluten. And there are way more celiacs out in our population than we realize because most celiacs don't follow the textbook as far as having diarrhea and malabsorption. We've got celiacs that have back pain and brain fog and have no digestive complaints. So we test everyone for celiac disease to make sure they're not reacting to gluten. And in general, we're telling people to not eat gluten anyway. But a person that has celiac has to take gluten-free much more seriously than someone who does not have those genes. And then, of course, there's food sensitivity testing. That means that you may be eating a perfectly healthy food like onions or spinach or something like that, but for whatever reason, your immune system has identified that as foreign and is attacking it each time you're eating it. So one of the things we like to do as we heal someone is investigate what foods they may be reacting to and remove those from their diet in order to heal and repair. And in general, a lot of times after we heal and repair, after removing that food, you can actually add that food back in the long run, usually not in the same amounts, but you can start introducing it and you can test your body to see how much of it can take before it starts creating more inflammation. So, of course, there's a lot of testing we can do in the functional medicine world, but this is a brief breakdown of how functional medicine differs from conventional medicine. And even in the conventional side, we even have some more advanced testing that we can do on our side. So I hope this video is helpful in understanding the difference between conventional medicine and functional medicine and what testing we can offer.